On today's episode of Watch Chair Go, we're going to try to put back together the 1987 Porsche 944 that we bought for $500. There's a long way to go, so let's get to it. What is going on, guys? I'm Watch Chair Go, and in the last episode, you saw the transmission come out, the rear axles come down, and of course, the torque tube almost come out. We're going to try to get the torque tube out, get everything in there, the static clutch set up, and start putting it back together. We ended up having to take the bell housing down with the torque tube because that snap ring is 1000% inaccessible. Not sure how that was ever intended. Maybe with 90-degree angle snap ring pliers and you come through the access hole, but you can't access that side, so it's not possible.
I think you have to install this whole hub and ring inside the bell housing, position it all up in there, and then through the access hole, put in all these Allen heads.
That might be true. Man, that is some carnage from that rubber ring. Good thing we got a pilot bearing for. That thing looks rough.
Feels like new though.
Does it?
Yeah.
Runs great?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right, it's flawless.
I wouldn't even touch it.
Oh, well, we bought one. I'd say it took about 1 hour to get to this point. Just getting this bell housing off and all the wires and sensors out from the top.
Yeah, I think that what the trans axle was like an hour. And
yeah.
The torque tube was like another hour or more.
Yeah, at least. Now we can start tearing the flywheel off, the ring off, everything like that. Swap the new stuff on and start reassembling. There's what happens when you start hearing a rattle out of your 944. That rubber ripped in half. I think there should be a market out there for somebody making these out of billet and balancing them. I mean, obviously the 944 market's probably all dried up, but this rubber center and that are $1,693. And Porsche is the only company that makes it. There's no aftermarket for it. This could totally be metal.
You know what I think somebody needs to do? First off, see how strong urethane is.
Yeah.
I watched a tutorial on a guy making his own urethane engine mounts.
It could be like Delrin or urethane and then pinned.
Yeah, DeBoss.
Yeah.
Is his name, the Canadian?
Yeah.
He set up a jig and just poured urethane in.
Is that factory? That Weld?
Probably.
That's weird.
But you could totally jig this up.
You could.
Carve all the rubber out and then just pour some urethane in here.
Yep.
Just set overnight and have a urethane bushing.
As long as you had a centering jig, like a spline set in the center, and it would center the outer, and then boom, hit it.
Could use an old flywheel.
Yep.
As a jig.
Yeah, you could.
Boom, there's somebody's $10,000 idea.
Yeah, you can make a lot of money doing this. There's no doubt. Because everyone has to do this static clutch thing. Now everything's out, and we know more. We've got this bracket that was broken, which is kind of annoying. There's like this speed sensor here that's hooked to nothing. You can see that right there. There's a plug in it, and it was on that bracket, and it's broken. So we might weld that back together. It looks like somebody else tried to work on this and failed. And then here, where you have 2 extra sensor pickups on the automatic that don't exist on the manual. So we're gonna have to go transfer these into that. And we need longer bolts, so we got a screwdriver there that's marked for the bolt length. Okay, there's our new pilot bearing. It's even nicer. Yeah, we're gonna get the old ones out, 1 bolt in the flywheel right there. We're gonna put some Loctite on those guys, start torquing them to spec. We have all new holes and set screws for the crank and reference pickups. Look at that, a clutch and a torque tube. We did a little check to see if the clutch was gonna spin, if we had holding pressure. We do have the holding pressure. It seems like everything's gonna be just fine, but you can take a look. There's our flywheel. We drilled new holes and tapped them for our position sensors. There's one of the new holes. There's another one of the new holes. We gotta put some set screws in there, and yeah, we have a clutch that is replacing the old rubber thing. Splines went right in. Now that all that's done, it's time to put the bell housing back, start putting back our set screws and position sensors and all that good stuff. We get all this buttoned up, slide the torque tube back in, bolt it all back together. Not too much, but as you can see, this will take a while. There's probably 100, 150 bolts here, which is pretty wild for what this thing is. We are buttoned up all the way to the back, the rear end's back together, all the bolts are in the rear, and now the transmission is about to go in, and this just comes down to running this jack up for like 15 minutes.
3 hours.
Built-in SpongeBob sound. Okay, torque tube's in, transmission's hung again. Transmission's actually kind of one of the easier parts, which is crazy. And as you can see, everything's back together, heat shield's in. We are ready to hang the exhaust next. However, we gotta do a little repair on the O2 sensor because it was previously repaired with butt splices. So I'm gonna hop in there with a soldering iron and some heat shrink, put that together the way it should be. After that, set the exhaust on there and hook it back up front. She's ready to go. Well, this is where we're going to have to leave it tonight. As you can see, the exhaust is kind of temporary back on, the starter's back in, transaxle in, rear end in, almost everything's in. But there's a few things we still have to do, like soldering up the O2 sensor, putting back the engine, crank position sensor, and the reference sensor. A lot of tedious stuff that needs done up under the hood. So once the O2's done, all the rest of the bolts can go in the exhaust, and we can just wrap up all the rest of the little things. We drove like 100 miles today on parts runs. Going to get those clutch bolts, finding the right ones took like 3 trips to the hardware store. It was crazy. Even after like we took a reference and it's still, they were bottoming out, it was, finding it was crazy. If you need to know, they're M6 or M8 1.25 by 50 millimeter, that's what you need. If I'm wrong on the bolt size, no big deal. The length is 50. So if you're going from an automatic to a static clutch, make sure you've got 950s with you. So we're putting the 944 back together, and this broke when it was coming out. Don't even know how it broke because it must just be brittle, but basically these are the sensors for the engine. Here we have crank position, here we have reference, and here we have a sensor that's literally nothing, and honestly I shouldn't even put it back. It just has a test port that you can hook a meter up to I guess see if the crank's turning. That would be some pretty basic troubleshooting, but it sits in this bracket off to the side of the main sensors here. And it goes about like that. As you can see, fits together perfectly right there. We were gonna have this Healy arcs back together, but when we tried to press the sensors out, we found out they won't come out because they're old and corroded, and we'd probably have to break it or replace the bracket to take care of it. So what we have here is JB Weld made a quick O'Reilly's run. This is the quick set stuff because the other stuff takes like 4 to 6 hours before you get a good set, and we're gonna put this back together right now. What I'm gonna do is mix up our JB Weld here and make way too much because it's kind of fun. Plus, anytime you open this stuff, you end up throwing away the rest because it just goes bad if you let it sit. And I use it maybe once a year. No real reason to save it. Got a little piece of wire right here that we can use to stir up our mixture. And then we'll probably use this. We'll just go ahead and put a bead on the inside, push these together, and then a bead on both sides, and then I will sand it down to make sure it's nice and smooth. Here's our mixture. When you can't use a welder on something, JB Weld is the move. All right, that's probably all the JB Weld we need right there. We're gonna smear it in there. So we'll end up with a bunch of squeeze out and put our parts back together. That looks pretty good. While we're waiting on that, let's go get the soldering iron out and put that O2 sensor back together. Here is our broken O2 sensor in the car. You can see the wires came cleanly out of the butt crimp there, and luckily whoever cut them before left them in different links, and they're different links in the harness as well. So I can actually see which one's which based on the heat shrink and the butt crimps that they left behind for us. Black is the longest, and then the 2 white ones I'm going to mark so we know which one's which, and then I will solder and heat shrink that back together. Yes, I know it'll change the resistance, but no more than it was changed before, and it'll run perfectly like this. I did try to take the O2 sensor out without my O2 sensor socket set, and it would not budge, even after spraying it down with knocker loose, so we're gonna fix it. All right, this will be the long white, and that will be short white. I'm gonna mark these with a Sharpie, and now we can cut off the butt crimps. I try to cut off as much of the butt crimp as I can to preserve the wire inside. Now all we have to do, throw some heat shrink on our wire, fire up the old Milwaukee cordless soldering iron, and stick these things together. O2 sensor looking pretty complete there, ready to start pulling the wire back up to where it connects at the very top of the engine bay. And our sensor bracket here, I'd say, is also looking pretty complete. She's feeling much better. I'm gonna let that set a little bit longer. I don't want to start putting it in the car and it'd snap back off. So we'll give it a little bit more time. It's only been like 10 minutes. We better give it like an hour. The JB Weld drying gives us plenty of time to get the wheels back on. Also, tires are on the way. I ordered those, and maybe another set of wheels is around for the car. You might hear more about that later. So let's go ahead and put these wheels on for now. And you can see we have a gigantic leak now, which is very unfortunate, but there's a little hairline crack right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and refill the transmission fluid. We'll probably pull all that in, and I gotta order another one of those little cups. At least it's easy to change. It's just 2 tins and a little plastic nut right there. I just got all the sensors back on, which is a massive undertaking. We got them off by going from the bottom with a swivel, and it worked so much better. Getting them back on from the top is probably one of the hardest jobs you'll ever do in your life. There's no room to work. But it's on. I just plugged the sensors in. Let's see what happens here. You can see that I haven't put the bracket back on the sensors yet, but I'll do that in a second. Let's see if it runs, because you do have to loosen this top bolt and adjust it. I just put it all the way out. I have a feeling all the way out will be close enough that it'll work. Also, we moved the set screws a little bit on that new flywheel, of course, because it has a completely different profile. Let's see what happens here. Also, the exhaust isn't hooked up, so I straight piped my Porsche 944. What? No! Here we go. Should I drive it like this? Crazy. Okay, that's ridiculously loud. Let's get this back in the air and put those exhaust gaskets back in it. All right, the engine bay is back together. I refilled the coolant reservoir, and I put the cover back on the injector rail, and everything is put back. So let's see if it starts again. If it does, it's probably time to take this thing out on its first drive. I'm pretty excited because when we started the last time, I didn't hear the rattle from the transmission, which means we probably succeeded if it goes into gear, that is. Seems like it runs all right. And it goes into gear, and it goes backwards and forwards. I think we can drive this car. Better button everything up. Well, there you go, guys. That is a static clutch install on a 1987 Porsche 944 with an auto. And I would say if you're gonna attempt this by yourself, you're gonna wanna lift. You're gonna want 2 people because it's a lot of work wrestling that drive shaft torque tube out of there. And it's gonna take a lot longer than you expected. We read on the forums that somebody was like, yeah, I can have that torque tube out in like 2 hours or something. And yeah, maybe you could, but it's a lot of work, especially when none of the manuals covered that little C-clip or snap ring that was in the front of that flywheel and held everything together. So basically just take everything apart, transaxle out, and then loosen up the torque tube, and then break all the bolts on the bell housing, and then bring it out a little bit, and then pull off the C-clip or snap ring, and then you'll have it out. And just getting it apart will take, it probably took 6 hours. Putting it back together, it actually goes quite a bit faster because there's no snap ring anymore. The torque tube slides right into the clutch, and it's faster. After that, it's all the little stuff that nickel and dimes you when you're bolting it all back together, like the exhaust and all the wiring and sensors. Mark the sensors, definitely mark the sensors. I didn't. Luckily, part of the plastic broke off one and helped me key those. That was actually a very nice thing. Those sensors are super old and brittle. Time for them to get replaced, but we couldn't even get them out of the bracket. Anyway, it's gonna drive now. Time to get it out on the road. Enjoy this car. And next up, we're gonna start cleaning it. Right now, it's completely dull, and that tint is terrible. I mean, it's pretty ugly. And the body's beautiful, so we gotta save it. That's what you're gonna see next. Quick tune up, clean it up, and then we're gonna drive it. I'd like to take it on a big road trip, so we'll see what happens. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to head on over to shopwatchjrgo.com where you can get cool shirts, not like this. And please, like, share, subscribe, do whatever you wanna do, and I'll talk to you next time. So much more Porsche stuff to go. I'm getting excited about this car. I've got a couple boxes at home already of parts for it.